know when you have to bribe children to come up here. And when I think that God his son not sparing sent him to die, I scarce can take it in. This is what we all sang together as part of our hymn of preparation. I'm so glad, Katie, that you slowed it down and really changed the melody there. Made it, I think, as sorrowful as we are to sing that with. Sorrow tinged with a wonder and joy in all of it. You know, and if you were reading closely to what Virginia read for us through our first two readings, you would have picked up, I think, on that theme, right? It's this theme of God's chosen or favored, being called to endure suffering. First from Isaiah 53, which is actually referred to as the suffering servant text. It's depicting this righteous one who is strangely oppressed and afflicted, counted with the transgressors, and tasked with bearing the sins of others, even as he himself is sinless. And from our second reading, which came to us from Hebrews 5, which illustrated the same pattern, Christ, who at his baptism heard about his belovedness, right? His chosenness as God's son, but is then led through great suffering. Jesus, who demonstrates that he is God's anointed, not through achieving any greatness as we would imagine greatness to be, but rather through his perfect and humble obedience to the Father. Yes, even as God hands him over to experience the cruelties of life, the injustice, and absolute powerlessness. And you know, we just sang this, and we just heard this, but I think the all too easy tendency for us is to quickly move away from this reality without sitting with it, without properly allowing it to seep in. You know, we gloss over it. I've used this image several times now, but it's like a duck. You go out onto a pond and you see a duck, and it submerges itself underwater, and it comes up, and it just shakes the water off, and it's never wet. The time underneath the water does nothing to it, right? And I fear that that's what happens with us. We aren't sitting with the scarce can take it in nature of what that hymn it speaks about, and what the scriptures point us to, and we don't allow it to have that penetrate into our hearts and into our minds. It's perhaps fitting then that our prescribed gospel reading from the lectionary from Mark also tries to skip us over this reality. If you remember, last week we had the rich man going away disappointed because he couldn't give his riches away to the poor and go follow Jesus. And the disciples wondered, who then could possibly enter the kingdom of heaven if the entry was so narrow? If you remember, it's easier for a camel to what? Go through the eye of the needle, that's right. And the last image was Peter saying, but we've done enough, right? Right, Jesus? We've left everything behind to follow you. surely we stand to inherit the rewards of this kingdom, right? And if you look, immediately after this scene in the Gospel of Mark, what immediately follows is Jesus launching into his third and final speech about the fate that awaits him in Jerusalem. This journey that the disciples are on as they follow behind Jesus. You know, he's revealing how he sees this pattern that's going to occur in his life. He's going to suffer at the hands of both the religious and political authorities, and he's going to die, only to be resurrected from the dead 3 days later. But this passage is skipped over in the lectionary, you know? But we need to have this in mind because it sets the immediate backdrop of what then happens in today's gospel reading. So if you want to turn to your pew Bibles, it's located in the back, page 44. And here is what happens in the text. And you can see for yourself. In your pew Bibles, you know, I hope you can take my word for it, but you can see for yourself that's the order of things. We're just following right down the line in chapter 10, right? And so, having skipped the third time Jesus foretells his death and resurrection, we get to this request of James and John. Hear now God's word. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask you to do." Whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." The word of God for the people of God this morning. Did you know that the Gospel of Mark was meant to be heard and not read? Scholars actually think the Gospel of Mark, which is the shortest of the Gospels, if you read it front and back, it'd take you an hour and a half to get through the 16 chapters of it. Scholars actually think it was meant to be performed with parts. And if we were hearing the Gospel of Mark in sequence, like we are partly doing today, that's what we're partly trying to do, to see it as a continuing story that is unfolding, we would really pick up on the irony of all of this. I hope you pick that up a bit here. Because here we see Jesus telling his disciples for the third and final time of how he's going to suffer and die, modeling for us this pattern of God's beloved, God's chosen, not reigning and lording over others, but blessed so that what? Blessed so that you might be a blessing unto others. And the disciples for the third and final time are revealed to be completely clueless. They have no idea what Jesus is talking about. If you remember the first instance, Peter tried to rebuke Jesus, and then he got sternly rebuked back. The second time, you find it in the ninth, that was in the 8th chapter. In the 9th chapter, you find Jesus says this, and the disciples dare not say anything. They're scared to speak up about it. And this third time, today, they must have gotten their confidence back because Peter said, we gave up everything, so now we're set to inherit it all. You see the disciples doing what? They're trying to climb up the corporate ladder to be found as executives in the incoming administration that Jesus is surely going to institute, occupying the C-suite, if you would. And in case you were tempted to think, oh, it's just James and John, those sons of Zebedee, who are trying to do this, I think we're supposed to see or catch that the other 10 disciples really aren't any better, right? Because what was their response? Did you catch that? They were what? They were angry. They were angry with James and John. How dare you outflank us for those limited seats at the left and right hand of Jesus? That's not fair, And I think we're supposed to get this because the very next line in the gospel reading says, Jesus calls to all of them. He brings all of them in and says, okay, stop trying to climb over the top of each other for power as we see happening out in the world. As it is with the Gentiles, those who don't know about God and God's ways. Instead, if you're following after me, in line with me, you're tasked with serving. Those who want to be first have to be last. Those who are great have to be found helping, serving. Slaves, Jesus says, indicating the social position you are supposed to be occupying willingly. Slaves who are the lowest rung on the ladder, surrendering yourself to be in a position of powerlessness. That is what that position was about. Rather than seeking your own advancement and power, instead seek to be a servant of all. I wonder, do you think, for those of you who were here last week, do you think Peter and the other disciples have really given up everything to follow Jesus? I see some people shaking their heads, And if we were seeing this performed, we would all have a laugh at this scene, because clearly what Peter says, we have left everything behind to follow you, Jesus. And James and John going, hey, Jesus, come here, come here. And then everyone getting upset about it. It reveals the truth, the folly of even thinking, right? And we see that it's not about the wealth. It's not about giving up things exteriorly. It's about the interior desires of the heart, because it's all revealed before Jesus, right? We can see, just like Jesus can, that the disciples, they're still being ruled by the forces of the world. That is what is occupying their hearts. And what I want to impress upon you, what the text is trying to have us all see, I think, is how this reality that's exposed, that this is the case for us too. We may be found following Jesus, in the exterior, being in church this morning instead of being out in the world. But are we? Have we left everything behind to follow after him? Are we becoming transformed into his image and likeness? Are we allowing ourselves to become changed by getting soaked underwater? Or are we like the duck, just shaking it off and having the water just be repelled off of us? Are we allowing ourselves to be handed over? Which is, if you're reading, that's what Jesus is saying. I'm going to be handed over. I'm allowing myself to be handed over to the authorities who will have their way with me. Are we allowing ourselves to be handed over by God as Jesus demonstrates? Or is it the inverse that is happening in our lives? Do we want God to hand over something to us? Because that's what James and John want, right? Immediately after Jesus says, I'm allowing God to hand me over to the world, James and John, as his disciples, following next to him, go, Jesus, we want you to hand over something to us. We're supposed to laugh. It's ironic, but it implicates all of us. We're not laughing at James and John as much as we are laughing with them, with the other 10 disciples who foolishly get angry with James and John for taking what they want in the first place. Because I think the truth of it is we are requesting the same thing. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. It's our will being done, not thy will. I think this is what we are meant to sit with. Because if we dare to see ourselves and compare our lives and the motivations which dominate our day-to-day, if we dare to compare our reflection out in the world and compare it to the reality that is revealed in Jesus Christ, boy, you see, it's like night and day, right? It really is. It's night and day. Even as we are calling ourselves disciples, I'm not sure if we're really learning what Jesus is teaching us. Because like the initial disciples, instead of acting as God's beloved, as Jesus reveals, given to the world, handed over to the world as a ransom, and having our lives poured out in loving service to help others. Sadly, if I can say this, I think instead we are found as hostage takers. Instead of being the ransom paid for hostages that liberate, we're the hostage takers. And we, if this gospel snippet reveals anything, we're found seeking to take God hostage. Yeah, we want to use Jesus as our genie or wishing fairy. I think Astrid has left the room, but she's reading a graphic novel right now called My Little Ponies, and the story is about encounters with a wishing fairy, and it leads to all sorts of hijinks because this fairy can grant what your heart desires, and I think we see it captured in the request that James and John make to Jesus. We want you to do what we ask of you. It's really there for us to see if we don't quickly bypass it. We're meant to see the depths of our folly, the inverse way in which we say we follow, but we are seeking Jesus to follow. We're revealed, if we're allowing the gospel light to reveal it, seeking to capture glory as we imagine it to be in human terms, where it's about winning, where we are elevated at the expense of others. And we know this because the world, it is all about winners and losers, right? We're all approaching election day, where there's going to be a clear winner and clear loser. And because of all of our justified reasons, we know that it's our team that needs to win, right? Jesus, I need you to do whatever I ask you to. And I'm sure James and John had justifiable reasons for that request, right? I think if we sat down and did a exit interview with them, well, what did you have in mind? What did, they wanted goodness, their goodness though, imposed out in the world. Because as we confess, it's me. And this is, I think, where I get to the wonder of it all. As we sing about how great thou art. Because Jesus, he sees all of this. He sees all of this right before him. For the third time, he's said, I'm going to die. And the disciples come back at him with, okay, well, this is what you need to do for me right now. And what does Jesus do? Does he pack up his things and say, you guys, you're hopeless. I'm not leading you anymore. I'm going to start over with a different group of people because you certainly don't get it and you don't deserve this. No, right? We see him continuing on. The very next chapter is him entering Jerusalem. And it's so different. It really is. It's so different from how we would go about our lives. I was struck with it yesterday at the breakfast because here I was enjoying this beautiful day, really basking in the warm glow of us doing so much good out in the world, and a passerby, he just, wow, talk about dumping a gallon of cold water on my face, says, no, pack this all up. Yeah, they don't deserve this. They don't know. They don't appreciate this. Why? You're just keeping them in the state of dependence. You're not affecting any change. So you might as well just pack up and go. And hearing it, I think, you know what? He's got a point. I mean, that's how we would operate in the world, right? It's what's the point of it? They've had their chances. 3 times Jesus has spelled it out. They haven't gotten it yet. And yet, he continues to the cross, where his best friends don't even get him, let alone for the world. And this has to be part of our understanding for us to truly grasp the fullness of the I scarce can take it inness of that hymn. Because over and over again, even as the disciples prove to be failures, even as the world rejects him, Jesus doesn't abandon them and leave them to their own devices as we would if we were ruling the world, as that passerby who had his king hat on would have, as I would. I see it all the time. Even as with my kids, I feel like, oh, again? No, there's got to be some limit where I draw the line. No. Jesus, who knows all of our weaknesses, chooses to side with us in obedience to God, who is then revealed through the cross to be siding with us too. Because as we profess, Jesus is the full revelation of our God. He is God made flesh. Now, this is what Jesus is demonstrating as his mission. This is his anointing. He is anointed as God's beloved to reveal to us the depth of this love, this greatness, how great thou art, this love with which we have been given and birthed into the world. You know, and he is seeking to tell God's story through his life. I mentioned it last week. It's his story, God's story. And the story that is being told time and time again, I think it's captured by the Apostle Paul, who writes in the 5th chapter of Romans, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person. Though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. You know, if they're really courageous, they might die for the sake of a good person. But God, get this. This is how great thou art. This is I scarce can take it in this. Here it is right here. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, while we didn't believe anything or could not possibly understand it, Christ dies for us. This is the ground upon which we must build up our faith. This is our blueprint too. Because guess what? Brothers and sisters, you laity on what is Laity Sunday, this is our collective mission, not just the pastor, not just people who have a special office, and guess what? Not just Christ. This is all of our crosses to bear as fellow children of God. If we are awakened to this identity of who we are, how we are meant to be fellow heirs with Christ, then we know that we have been tasked with the same mission and ministry that Jesus was tasked with. To be a healing presence out in the world, to act as the ransom, not as hostage takers. We're meant to be the ransom which liberates the people around us. This is what our lives are to be about. This is the purpose with which we have been birthed. This is the baptism that God is seeking to give to us. And it's a beautiful story if we can inherit it. It's a life that we be so purposeful and filled because it will be about grace. It will be about love. It will be about works not to justify or glorify ourselves, but works done in service to others to help heal and to redeem, even when it looks like folly to us, or perhaps especially when it looks like folly to us. I wonder if we might meditate on this as we sing our hymn of response, which is found in 424 of your Red Pew hymnals. Must Jesus bear the cross alone?